You know that moment when you're sitting with your phone in your hand and you actually realize, that the last 15 conversations in your chat history all start with your name? Every single one. You texted first. You checked in first. You sent the meme, asked how they were doing, followed up when they went quiet. And for a while, you told yourself that's just who you are. You're the initiator, the glue, the person who keeps things together. So one day, you decide to test it. Not dramatically, no speech, no confrontation. You just stop. You wait. You tell yourself if they care, they'll reach out. And the days pass, and they don't. And what hits you isn't even the silence. It's the fact that nobody seemed to notice you were gone. If you've been here, if you've done the quiet experiment and gotten the quiet answer, this video is for you. Because what you did wasn't pettiness, it wasn't a game, and it definitely wasn't coldness. Your psychology was just trying to survive something, and here's what was actually happening. Let's start with something that probably sounds familiar. Think about your role in most of your relationships. When someone is struggling, where do they go? When a friend has a crisis at 2 a.m., whose number do they dial? When there's tension in the group, who quietly smooths it over? Yours. At some point, without anyone officially appointing you, you became the emotional anchor of your social world. The one who listens, the one who checks in, the one who remembers. And honestly, you're good at it. It probably feels natural, maybe even automatic. Here's what's fascinating about that. Psychologists studying stress responses found something that challenged a lot of assumptions. For years, we thought humans responded to stress with fight or flight. But researcher Shelley Taylor discovered a whole other pattern, especially common in people wired toward empathy. She called it the tend and befriend response. Under pressure, some nervous systems don't run or fight. They nurture, they reach out, they take care of others as a way of managing their own anxiety. Translation, some people cope with their own pain by pouring into everyone else. But here's where it gets complicated. That system, the tending, the nurturing, the constant giving, it was never designed to run in one direction forever. It requires reciprocity, not perfectly, not transactionally, but enough, some evidence that the care flows both ways. When it doesn't, the system doesn't just slow down, it burns out. And what burnout looks like from the outside is someone who stopped reaching out. But what it actually is someone whose emotional reserves were emptied repeatedly and never refilled. Exhaustion wearing the mask of distance. You didn't become cold, you became empty. There's a difference. Now I want you to understand something that genuinely changed how researchers think about social rejection. Neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberg ran a study where participants were put in a brain scanner and asked to play a simple virtual game of catch with two other players. What they didn't know was that the other players were programmed, and at some point they would just stop throwing the ball to the participant. No explanation. Just exclusion. What showed up in the brain scans was remarkable. The area that lit up, the anterior cingulate cortex, is the same region that activates when you feel physical pain, not metaphorical pain, not emotional discomfort, the same neurological circuitry that fires when you break your arm. Being left out of a 10-minute computer game produced measurable, real neurological pain. Now think about what it means to be the person who always initiates and is never initiated toward. Not once, not twice, but consistently, across relationships, over years. That's not a small thing your brain just files away. That's repeated activation of a pain circuit. And just like you'd eventually stop touching a hot stove, your nervous system eventually builds a defense. Stopping outreach isn't rejection of connection, it's self-protection from a pain source the brain has logged, documented, and finally decided to move away from. You're not dramatic for feeling it deeply. You're literally wired to. Here's something worth sitting with. Before you became the person who stopped texting, there was probably a version of you who reached out constantly and hoped desperately that someone would reach back. Maybe that was childhood. Maybe it was a friendship that gutted you. Maybe it was a family dynamic where your needs were met with dismissal or silence. Attachment theory, introduced by John Bowlby and built on by decades of research, tells us something important. The way we experience connection as children doesn't just shape our memories, it shapes our nervous system's operating instructions. Some people, after enough experiences of reaching out and being ignored, rejected, or let down, develop what's called an avoidant attachment pattern. And here's what's crucial to understand. It's not a personality flaw, it's a learned survival strategy. The brain, especially a young brain, is adaptive. If every time you said, "I need something," the response was nothing, or worse, punishment, the brain starts to update its prediction model. Vulnerability equals disappointment. Reaching out equals pain. Better to need less, better to expect less. So the internal defense mechanism builds itself quietly, a kind of preemptive withdrawal. Don't ask before you're rejected. Don't reach out before you're ignored. And years later, that mechanism still runs, even when the relationships in your life are different, even when the people are safer. The old code doesn't automatically update. You stopped texting first, partly because your nervous system learned, a long time ago, that expecting a response was a gamble you kept losing. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Some people don't stop reaching out because they stopped caring. They stop because they genuinely cannot find the words. There's a concept in psychology called alexithymia, and that word sounds clinical and complicated, but what it describes is actually very human. It's a difficulty, sometimes a near impossibility, of identifying and expressing your own emotional experience. Not that the emotions aren't there, they are, fully, deeply, but the pathway between feeling and articulating gets blocked somewhere. Research suggests it's more common than most people realize, and that often develops in environments where emotional expression wasn't modeled, welcomed, or safe. So you have someone who feels everything, the distance, the exhaustion, the quiet grief of always being the one who tries. But when someone asks, "Are you okay?" or "What do you need?" they go blank. Not because nothing is happening inside, because there's no vocabulary for it. And when you can't explain what you need, you stop asking for it. The silence isn't emptiness. It's a language barrier between what you feel and what you can say. And over time, when nobody helps you build the bridge, you stop standing at the edge expecting to cross. Okay, before we go further, I want to make an important distinction, because this is where a lot of people either get relief or get a little uncomfortable. Not all silence is the same. There's a silence that's chosen, conscious, intentional. You've done the reflection, you've recognized the imbalance, and you've made a deliberate decision about where to direct your energy. That's a boundary. That's self-awareness operating correctly. That's healthy. And then there's a silence that's a shutdown. You're not choosing quiet, you've gone numb. The reaching out didn't stop because you made a decision. It stopped because your nervous system hit a wall and disconnected. You stopped feeling the impulse entirely, not because you healed, but because you went into a kind of emotional standby mode. The difference matters. One is evolution, one is survival, and only one of them actually feels okay inside. Here's the honest question worth asking. When you stopped reaching out, did it feel like freedom or did it feel like nothing? Not wrong either way, but worth knowing. Here's something that reframes the whole thing. Self-determination theory, one of the most well-supported frameworks in all of motivational psychology, says that humans have three core psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness, connection to others. Notice that connection is in there. It never goes away. The person who stopped texting first didn't stop needing people, they stopped performing for people. There's a massive difference. When you're always initiating with nothing returned, you're not really in a relationship. You're running a one-person show and calling it connection. And at some point, consciously or not, something in you recognizes that, and it starts protecting your need for real relatedness by pulling back from the counterfeit version. Stopping outreach isn't abandoning connection. It's refusing to keep investing in connections that were never really there. That's not withdrawal. That's the beginning of self-respect. So if you're someone who used to text first, who used to show up, check in, hold things together, and now you don't, here's what the psychology actually says about you. You're not cold. You're not damaged. You're not someone who gave up on people. You are someone whose nervous system remembered every time the effort wasn't returned, every unanswered check-in, every conversation that only existed because you started it. And eventually, quietly, without drama, it decided that your care deserved somewhere better to land. That's not becoming a worse version of yourself. That's finally learning that you are also someone worth showing up for. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. And if you feel like this kind of content is genuinely changing how you understand yourself, I would genuinely appreciate your support.